because our motorbikes are not like motorbikes in Jakarta or Ho Chi Minh City. They're not nice, comfy Hondas. They're, they're like literally flimsy $100, $150, you know, motorbikes that look like they're from the 70s,
Right.
And you cannot sit on one of them for 10 hours. It's impossible. So we bet on a supply which you only clock in a couple of hours a day. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to pay them a bonus, right? While they were bleeding money trying to force people to work 10 hours, quit their jobs,
Yeah.
And pay all these crazy bonuses. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard.
Welcome to Billion Dollar Moves, the show for the top US and Asia founders, funders, and execs. From the growing pains of a unicorn journey to IPO, scaling a venture capital firm, and the shift of wealth, we cover it all. Good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be back here.
Breaking news. Sort of. Ride-hailing giant Gojek and marketplace Tokopedia, Indonesia's two largest startups, said a couple of days ago that they've merged their businesses to form GoTo Group, the largest technology group in the Southeast Asian nation. All this before seeking a stock market debut at home and in the United States with an expected public markets valuation targeted between 35 and 40 billion, as reported in February by Bloomberg. This sets more fuel to fire of Superapps rising in Southeast Asia, a trend that is actually moving from east to west, with folks like Uber transforming itself beyond a transportation company into the operating system of our daily lives. But is this a short-lived trend? Will the Southeast Asian tech giant threaten other local players in the region? In comes my next guest, Muneeb Maayr, the brains behind Hyper-local marketplace powered by a network of motorcycles, Bykea, Pakistan. Fresh off a Series B round with millions in its pocket, Bykea is an all-in-one app for transportation, logistics, and cash-on-delivery payments, reshaping the landscape of Pakistan and beyond. You don't want to miss this. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to Billion Dollar Moves. My name is Sarah Chen, your host. And today I have with me a really special guest, an introspective entrepreneur that I've always enjoyed speaking with, whether we're on panels, whether we're, speaking about different issues. I always love hearing Muneeb's point of view. And today I'm so glad to have a power hour with him where we will be diving a little bit deeper than usual. And as I hear it, on Billion Dollar Moves, we call it no corporate BS type answer. So Muneeb, high expectations for you. How are you?
I'm well. Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Totally. Well, let's get started here. I really want to understand just a little bit about your journey. You've been doing a couple of things in the last couple of years. This is not, as one of your investors told me, this is not Muneeb's first rodeo. In fact, it's your third. You actually started in investment banking. Left because of, I believe, post 9/11, it was a little bit challenging, and then ended up leading the Pakistan operations for SNL, now S&P, and later going into Daraz and Bykea. And yet you say, I'm not the smartest in the room. I'm not the 4.0 GPA. But what then got you to all these different chapters?
Yeah, well, so so I'm from Pakistan, right? So I grew up here, and if you don't have a lot of money, then you apply to like 100 universities and hope that one of them is going to give you a better deal in terms of a scholarship. So that's how I ended up landing in the US. I ended up going to the college that gave me the best scholarship. So it's a small liberal arts school in California, Whittier College. I moved from there to another larger public school called, University of Florida. Gatorade, if you've ever had it, comes from Gators, which is their football team. In my third and fourth year, I was at University of Virginia. And the reason I moved is because, I was I needed to make money to pay off some debts that I had sort of collated from trying to get to college, and I'd heard that investment banking makes a lot of money.
Yeah.
So wanted to graduate from college and make enough money to pay off my debt. So, University of Virginia was one of the, I think, handful, maybe a couple of the public schools in America where investment banks or strategy consulting companies come to recruit, right? Except for the Ivies, right? The Ivies, that's a staple. They'll go to the Harvards and the Browns and the Yales. So that allowed me to slot myself into these interviews, and I think, again, interviewed a lot of places. It's funny, I say it's like dating, right? Like, or trying to find the right girl, right? So, so you meet a lot of them, but it's very seldom that you connect. But got fortunate to connect with some folks at Bear Stearns. Joined Bear Stearns in investment banking in New York City. That was a great learning curve. I think just taught me how to work hard, right? You may think you're smart, but as soon as you get into investment banking class, like, you find that everyone around you is as smart, if not smarter than you, right? So I was there for about a year and a half or so, and then I hated it, and I wasn't probably the best investment banker anyways, because what we were doing was, at least as first year analysts, we were basically going into quarterly and annual financial statements, pulling the data out and populating historical financials so that investment bankers could build projections. And it made no sense why you would pay someone so much money, at least in the first 6 months, to collate this data. So that got me thinking as to why, you wouldn't do this in a country where labor was cheaper and you could hire a lot of people to sort of collate some of this data. On public companies, it's publicly accessible. So that got me thinking about content collection. I joined a company called SNL. And I joined them because I tried to make my own content business, but I didn't have the visa to stay on in the US. So I had to go join someone to be able to stick around in the US.
Right.
And within 6 months, I convinced them to outsource work to me in Pakistan. So I moved back to Islamabad, which is my hometown, and started basically hiring for their back office. And that ultimately over 7 years grew to about 600-700 people.
Wow.
And ultimately got acquired by Standard & Poor's. But again, I was a senior leader, I think the top 10, 15 people in the company. But that business ultimately sold for almost over $2 billion, to Standard & Poor's.
Right.
So right after that, got the opportunity to, so basically I had started with a friend of mine, we'd started building a clone of eBay for Pakistan. And we were trying to raise capital for it. And we ran into the guys at Rocket Internet, and they were like, we're a clone factory pretty much. We've got these templates. We're not going to buy your template or your business. Why don't you come run our template? And the template was basically a clone of what initially was Zalora,
right?
From Southeast Asia, or Jabong in India. And it's called Daraz in Pakistan. It was initially a fashion venture. But then very, very quickly, in about a year and a half or so, it converted to a general merchandise platform. So a clone of Lazada. So same, Rocket Internet ran Lazada, Rocket Internet ran Daraz. And so you get plugged in, you get these fancy titles of a co-founder. You're not really a co-founder, you're like a paid CEO. But it's like a crash course MBA. And I didn't have an MBA. Like, everyone at Rocket was typically, an MBA from a top school. I wasn't. but it was, for me, it was like an MBA, right? Just a great MBA. And Rocket Internet is a great university. It's absolutely fantastic. And particularly if you can survive 4 years of Rocket Internet, you're a dinosaur.
Something. Yeah.
You're a dinosaur there, right? I mean, most high turnover, because the environment is very aggressive, and you build fast and you fail fast as well. So after about 4 years there, kind of wanted to build something on my own for the first time, pretty much. So yes, you may look at my history and say, oh, I've had all these successes, but I've been sort of a leader for other people's businesses, right?
Right.
And this is pretty much my first real business.
And why? I mean, I've heard you talk about Daraz and what you've learned there as well. But ultimately, you decided that of course, you're talking now about how you wanted your own thing, right? Your own gig. But why Bykea? Why the idea of the opportunity of 17 million motorbikes? I mean, that's relatively different from what you started at Daraz.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. One, when we started marketing, we recognized that what we were basically selling initially was, fashion, right? And fashion also catered to the upper middle class. And then as soon as we turned into a Lazada clone, we were selling a lot of smartphones because it got a lot of GMV, right? So we were chasing GMV, right? But ultimately, like I didn't think that a country like Pakistan, like for the internet to be relevant for a larger demographic, how many people are you going to try and sell a brand new smartphone to, or like a nice designer suit, right? And so when I saw what Nadeem was doing and Nadeem was also at Zalora at one point,
Right. Yeah.
When I sort of like started watching what he was doing in Indonesia.
So Nadeem and Gojek for the listeners.
Yeah, Nadeem Gojek, yeah. Well, when I started seeing what he was doing there, and I started seeing Uber and Careem start in Pakistan, that got me thinking. And Uber and Careem in Pakistan were focused on the car category. And I kept meeting some of their leadership, particularly Careem's, and I was like, when are you going to start motorbikes? And they had no plans. They had no plans for motorbikes, right? And motorbikes made sense to me because, Pakistan, just like Indonesia or Vietnam, or for that matter, India, there are more two-wheeler motorbikes than there are four-wheeler cars. And if you've got to deliver a person or deliver an e-commerce parcel, or you got to deliver a pizza, it's got to be on a motorbike. It's not going to be in a car, right? So if you're trying to play a supply game where, you're trying to leverage a supply, it's got to be motorbikes. It can't be four-wheeler cars in these emerging geographies.
So Muneeb, just want to double click on that. Not many who are tuning in, some of them are American, tuning in, may not understand what it means when you say you can't do this on a car. Tell us a little bit about, what the landscape is. I mean, Pakistan, and we talk about this a lot, right? It's a huge population. It's going to be 220 million now, I believe.
Yeah.
But, that is, not reflective of how many are mobile connected, how many are Urdu speaking, and Bykea is also, you started it as an Urdu based app. Tell us a little bit about the landscape here and why you thought motorbikes is the way to go.
Yeah. So many of these countries, including Pakistan, urban density is very, very high, right? So if you look at Karachi is about, some say 20 million, but conservative is 15 million people, right? Jakarta is anywhere between 10 and 12 million people as well, right? These cities are huge, right? They're huge metropolitans. And there's a big population that's living in very close proximity. So, there are many pockets in the city where you can't even go in a car, let alone, you can't even go in a three-wheeler. You've got to go on a two-wheeler. Like if you've been to Bangkok, some people have not been to Jakarta and haven't been to Karachi, right? But if you've been to Bangkok, you've got to meander around in these alleys where four-wheelers just don't have access. So so yeah, I mean, motorbikes is the way of life for many people, and you know, the epitome of this is for sure Jakarta, but Ho Chi Minh City, you know, that's a city with as many two-wheeler motorbikes as perhaps the population of that city. So motorbikes run everything in these cities.
Yeah, so it's essentially infrastructure, and there's a lot more meandering that you can do because of just the sheer traffic, right? In Jakarta,
Yeah.
we joke about how it's macet all the time. It's a traffic jam everywhere that you go. So definitely a lot more condensed, and within the cities as well. So as you were building Bykea, you know, it's been a couple of years now. You started what, 2016, I believe. How has your
Yeah, we started December 2016. So realistically, we started 2017. You know,
right?
But yeah, please proceed with your question.
And how did you evolve? You know, I've spoken to a couple of your investors, couple of peers, and one thing that really struck me was one of them said, and you probably know who this is, but I was surprised actually, and I was actually confused by why Bykea didn't die a natural death, because you were really going head in with you know, the sort of wars between Uber, Careem, and there was a lot of struggle in first building it up in the first few years, but yet you persisted. Tell us a little bit about this journey here on how you built Bykea, and how has your business changed over the years?
Yeah, so when we launched with like $1 million in seed capital, right? And as soon as basically Careem, which was the most well-funded startup in the Middle East, which ultimately sold to Uber, and as soon as basically they launched the motorbike category, which they did because they were failing in the three-wheeler category, so they were like, wait a minute, we thought two-wheelers would not work, but clearly Bykea is making it work. I mean, they spent probably $1 million for the launch of their two-wheeler category, right? Yeah. So we were fighting against people with very, very deep pockets, and then Uber jumps in the motorbike category as well. But you know, one thing we realized is that the only thing they have is money, right? That's all they have, right? And you can push all the discounts in the world, right? And you can put all the billboards in the world. But if your product is not comprehensible or easy for the mass audience, both on the supply side and the demand side, right? Then you're just driving user behavior stickiness for greed, right? And the minute you pull those subsidies, your supply or your demand is going to vanish, right? And you can keep playing this game of throwing money perpetually, right? But ultimately, any product that is local, where the locals are constantly customizing it to meet the product needs of the audience, will win. And I'll give you examples of that. So the first thing we did, one, we knew our app was in Urdu, the local language. Now you'd be like, well, how difficult is it for Uber and Careem to have an app in Urdu? What most people don't realize is that we didn't even have a smartphone-based script in Urdu till recently, right? Wow. The Arabic script was used, which is a different script to our script, which is more like a Persian script. So that was one problem. So initially when Bykea launched, we would paste images, you know, in Urdu, right? And then we recognized that people couldn't search in their own language. Like, you know, most people in India can't search in their own language either, by the way, just for context, right? Yeah. But in India, they have resolved that because there are hundreds of languages, you know, they've resolved to make English the common language between people from North and the South, and for people to communicate with one another. In Pakistan, it's still not English, it's still Urdu, which is our national language. And so we made the product be a catalog-based journey where people would click one click at a time to so for example, if you want to enter a destination that you want to go to, right? What do you do in Uber today? You enter where to, but requires you to know how to spell a certain street, right? But if you don't know, if you can't spell very well, you get frustrated with it. So what we did was we created zones. So we said, okay, you want to go to DHA, which is a section within Karachi.
Right.
Choose the zone within DHA. So I want to go to DHA phase 5. That's level 2. And then within DHA phase 5, which certain other map location you want to go to. So it was a click away. It was a click away to choosing your destination. Similarly, on the driver app, and this is like hilarious, right? Uber and Careem spent millions of dollars, and they were showing an address, a string address to drivers in English that they couldn't comprehend. And also in a city where Google's string address was not very accurate, right?
Right.
When drivers, particularly given that they're not super educated, they understand areas in a city, like, for example, like they'll understand that you want to go to like, let's take the same example, Karsas. Like there's a zone, there's an area within the city called Karsas. And so they'll comprehend that you want to generally go towards Karsas, but they won't necessarily comprehend like a particular street within that area because they don't know every street in the city. So it's small changes like these which allowed both the supply side and the demand side to comprehend what they were doing. And so what happened, and I'll tell you the story today, we're probably 11 times the size of Careem bike. We've literally like obliterated them in Karachi.
Wow.
And I think Uber Moto almost doesn't exist in Karachi. I think the only city these guys exist in is where their management sits, which is in Lahore. So that when their leadership flies in, they can say, oh, we still have a city. But that's the smallest of the 3 cities in the country in terms of, digital commerce and ride hailing. So let them keep the smallest city.
Yeah, so this is interesting, Muneeb. I mean, definitely the hyper local aspect there is very important, and I think that's why in a lot of countries, right? There's a reason why Didi in China did a lot better than Uber, and finally they gave up, and why Grab is expanding so rapidly. But when I reflect on your personal journey, you talked about the rise, and we all sort of, those of us in venture sort of know this. The Rocket Internet titles, when you look on it, it's like, oh yeah, it's kind of questionable. But what they did, which was very smart, is hire a local like yourself to innovate within. Why, with the amount of capital that Uber had and Careem had, couldn't they have done the same thing and then brought the rich insights that someone like you has brought to Bykea to compete?
Yeah, but I think, the product is typically made in the headquarters, right? And, if you're in the central team, you're going to focus on your core markets. So you're going to optimize the priorities for software development and product for where the bulk of your business is. And the reason why locals ultimately win is because they can tweak their product a lot faster, right? They can get to they can do even offline marketing, the kind of BTL intelligence that they can get and drive into their marketing is a lot more impactful. So, could they have? Yeah, but you hardly see anyone really do that in any great way today.
Right.
So I'm sure. Listen, there are products like Facebook, WhatsApp, Google, that are global products. But some of those products are visual. So Facebook is a visual product, right? And it has the network that is hard to break out of, right? But in transactional businesses, right, what matters is speed to transaction. That's one.
Right.
Which we also were better at because we opened our supply up to part-timers. They focused on full-timers, They focused on clocking 8, 10, 12 hours on a motorbike. And that was, in my opinion, quite stupid, because our motorbikes are not like motorbikes in Jakarta or Ho Chi Minh City. They're not nice, comfy Hondas. They're like literally flimsy $100, $150, you know, motorbikes that look like they're from the 70s,
Right.
you know, and you cannot sit on one of them for 10 hours. It's impossible. So we bet on a supply which would only clock in a couple of hours a day. We didn't have to pay them a bonus, right? While they were bleeding money trying to force people to work 10 hours, quit their jobs, you know, and pay all these crazy bonuses. So yeah, you know, I think it's hard. It's hard because they just can't move fast enough.
Yeah, so what you bring up there, I think is very interesting in terms of the global and local, and that gives me a very nice segue into the topic of the day, which is, you know, GoTo Group is slated to list later on in the United States for a valuation of 35 to 40 billion. The rise of a super app, and now instead of sort of the Facebook, you know, with the WhatsApp being customized by the locals to whatever they use, right? I mean, we talk about WhatsApp being used for, you know, in ways that even the people who created WhatsApp didn't foresee it, especially across the emerging markets. And now you have a huge super app that grew sort of from the likes of Indonesia. How do you feel about that? You know, is there a risk there of a player like them threatening your business?
I mean, why do you think Gojek won in Indonesia or led in Indonesia, right? Of course, part of that was money, you know, but part of that was, you know, localization as well, right? So you know, when we look at, so when I look at basically Gojek, I love that business. That's the business that inspired us to start Bykea, right? But when I look at Tokopedia, that's the business that I sort of I was involved in e-commerce prior to basically my ride-hailing experience. So when I see them mesh, I'm ecstatic. And why? So these countries are not like China or the United States or India or Brazil. Because in China, you will buy from someone who may be hundreds of miles away. Same in the US, same in Brazil, same in India. But if you're in Indonesia, if you're in Jakarta, the probability is when you're buying something in e-commerce, you're most likely buying it from someone in Jakarta, because these cities are so big and they're concentrated. Similar in Karachi, right? So the premise behind even e-commerce delivery being a few days late, okay, is a risky premise. Partly also because a lot of these payments are made cash on delivery, which means that the customer can change their mind in 2-3 days, right? And so if you really want to make e-commerce work, you've got to make it hyper local. And what that means is if I click and I buy a cover for my smartphone, right? The reason I'm buying online is because I don't want to go through the hassle of getting on a scooter or getting in a bus, going to the other part of town and buying it. I can. It'll take me 35, 45 minutes. I can. I don't want to, right? Because I don't want to waste my time. But if you tell me, I'll either get this today or I'll get this in 2 to 3 days, my propensity is just go 35, 45 minutes and go buy it, right? And so what ride hailing solves is ride hailing provides a supply fleet, which is on demand. Someone can go to that mobile shop, buy that smartphone cover and bring it to you in 35, 40 minutes, save you time. And it's the equivalent experience of you getting it in the same day. You're probably going to get it in the same hour, right? Maybe 2 hours at max. So I think the future of e-commerce in these geographies, in very, very large, dense urban cities, is in the mesh of e-commerce and ride hailing. And this applies to Singapore too, right? Like
Yeah.
if you had the propensity to buy something today versus, buy today and get in 3 days, why would you buy from Shenzhen in China unless it's at a huge discount, right?
Right.
You'd buy it only if it's way cheaper.
Which they can do as well. And I want to, dive a little bit deeper on this. The great pleasure to introduce Ali Soomro, a longtime friend of mine, who is a business architect, a long time sort of deep in the business of trying to understand data and turning data into value as well, which I think it's really up the alley here with what Muneeb is trying to do. Ali, over to you.
Well, I'm speaking to somebody about the different ride-hailing platforms we have. And a prominent businessman within Karadar, which is quite a densely populated business region in Karachi, I asked him why not use some of the other services, and he felt that when he has to move cash from one of his branches to the bank, he feels safer to use Bykea. And I asked him why, and he said the familiarity of the app and how it's all in Urdu, and the drivers they understand the areas rather than ask for addresses, makes him feel safer. So kind of just adds into that user experience that you've created. So just on that point that you made about being hyper-local and understanding the local market, I'll go straight into my questions because I'm a bit short on time anyway. You are Bykea is your core product is logistics, and it's a bike. Predominantly, a bike is your medium of providing these transport services. I know you have had some campaigns around this, but how are you planning to kind of scale up and incorporate a vast majority of the population, which is women, onto this platform? Where, I mean, obviously, providing transport to women in our country is already a big challenge because it's not safe as such. So how do you plan, when you scale up further, as you are at the moment, to incorporate this vast majority of the sector, which I think currently is slightly untapped for you guys?
Yeah, so I think if you split this up, right, for transport, we've got to get to a stage where women who feel they should not sit behind a man on a motorbike and travel alone, we've got to get past that mental hurdle, cultural hurdle, and paranoia around safety for women to use Bykea more than they do today. So mostly women do not use Bykea. Having said that, you'll probably read, there's an article from the New York Times as well, which talks about women using Bykea and how that is kind of transforming the way women and the society thinks about movement across genders. So I think we can hope that we can build trust for women to know that they're being tracked, know that they can share with their loved ones, and still trust sitting with a stranger to move from A to B. So that there's nothing we can do beyond that, because we're not getting into cars. We're not launching the car category. Now, if ever we think of launching the three-wheeler category, that's a category women use, yes. But listen, if you're in the streets, and I hate to say this, but if you're in the streets of Karachi or the streets of Lahore or the streets of basically Rawalpindi, you don't see a lot of women. And that's very sad. But, we've, unfortunately, as a nation, we've kind of caged them. So now what do you do after you've caged them? What can we do as a business? We can enable them to do commerce, right? And so the payment idea that we have is really to enable social commerce sellers, Facebook, Instagram sellers, to be able to transact, send their documents, their parcels, their deliveries, their payments, leveraging our network, right? And And I think if we can empower them financially or economically, right, we can help pull them out of the cages that they're in, right? So it's a constant struggle. We, even at our organization, have made a deliberate effort to hire the smartest women out there. So for example, our product and engineering is led by a female. Our marketing is led by a female. So we have female leaders, who are also, representing not just Bykea, but what the modern Pakistani woman can do. And we hope that our foray into commerce, into payments, is going to enable a segment of society which is handcuffed today to be able to be more economically independent.
Thanks, Ali. Thanks. And thanks for joining us. Appreciate that. I know you have to go. So thanks so much for that. And Muneeb, obviously, this is a topic I care a lot about, that. And I'm glad that you're seeing it as a priority, because I think, the independence of women and, enabling them through technology will be a huge determining factor here. We can't let the digital divide, I think we've talked about this before, the digital divide can, the opportunity of technology can help us or divide us. And I'm really looking forward to the leadership of folks like yourself to bring us out here to the other side. I've seen in Nepal, actually, there are a couple of women that are driving sort of what looks like the tuk-tuks in Thailand, and it's really exciting. Now I have my next question for you, coming again from Europe. So you have, some fans across the globe here from the audience. From Luxembourg, I have Marisha Naz, who is from Amazon, and she leads the private brands for Amazon Nutrition and Healthcare. Over to you, Marisha.
Thanks for the introduction, Sarah, and thanks for having me on here. Hi, really nice to meet you, and fantastic story. Super, super interesting. My question is around, with super apps generally, I guess there are a couple of main popular areas, one being transport, the other being financial services, and the third, partnership with telcos, all of which I think you've spoken about today. All of these industries are heavily regulated or regulatory driven, and in emerging markets, we have a little bit more risk where regulation changing drastically from day to day does happen. It's part of the business. It's something that we those of us who are in that sector have to manage. So I'm curious to know, what is your mental model on thinking of these regulatory risks as you expand into different verticals to become a super app? I'm curious to know how you think of the risk, how you quantify it, and eventually, what is your mental model for managing and mitigating these regulatory risks?
Yeah, so because of the way we think of it, right? So we've got this network. Now the network is profiled. So we, in our supply, we've got bronze, silver, gold, diamond, right? What that means is what kind of job they're going to get. Can they collect cash? Will they get a credit for 12 hours? Yes, no, right? So we've been sort of pretty good at deciding who to give the job to or who to offer the job to, right? Because a lot of the jobs are also picked up by multiple, they're offered to multiple drivers, one of the drivers picks it up. So in terms of e-commerce delivery, it already happens in motorbikes, we already do it. But the thing with our countries is that most of the e-commerce payments are cash on delivery. Now you may say, oh, they'll eventually become digital. Maybe. I'll tell you why I say that.
Right.
If in the United States, you had the option to pay after you got the item, why would you use a card? Why would you prepay in advance? Right? So the fact that basically cash on delivery has gotten people addicted to after they receive the item is a hard thing to change. Okay. Now, having said that, people should have the option to prepay partially through a card, through Visa, MasterCard, or their bank accounts, to ensure the seller to ship the item. Absolutely. So will we be offering that? Yes, we will. Will we be using the rails of existing, payment merchants? Yes. So our strategy is don't try and build a wallet. Okay. The reason you get into regulatory problems is because everyone has been spinning a story around EMI, because the reason they wanted to get an EMI is because they want to store money, right? And in storing money, they wanted to become a bank. And the reason they wanted to become a bank is because they wanted to lend. So that was the premise behind these EMIs, and these licenses. And I'm against that. I'll tell you why I'm against it. We have no near-term plans to get into any sort of banking, any sort of lending, okay? The business that we want to be in is to be able to match two parties,
Right.
allow them to pay each other immediately, but charge a take rate. So think of a Visa, MasterCard, or a PayPal for cash. So if you can charge your commission and route the payment immediately, the seller is happy because their cash flow gets a lot better.
Right.
Right. And the buyer basically can pay on delivery, but the delivery happens in 35 minutes. Right. So, and they can also pay by digital cards or ultimately bank accounts, but also cash. So what we're trying to do is we're just trying to expedite the transaction, expedite the receipt of money by the seller, but against a fee. So I don't know too many banks in the world which are worth $1 trillion, but Visa is, MasterCard is. Tell me about one bank in the world which is worth $1 trillion. Why would I want to be a bank?
Yeah, so that's interesting, and definitely want to speak a little bit more about that. I was tuning into, I believe, M1 Finance, and they're looking at sort of payments and sort of revolutionizing that as well. And one thing that was said about the threat that a lot of this fintech solutions pose to banks, talking about banks here, and the fact that you don't want to be that. A lot of countries are leapfrogging in some way, and that's particularly exciting for me as I look at the emerging markets across Asia and in places like Pakistan. In China, some of these apps don't even, it's all about just making payments on a super app, where you don't even have to include your Visa or anything like that. And in the US, it's a very different model where even with fintech solutions, they still tag along the Visa and the different sort of merchant providers, right, the enablers. And that if it's removed in the way that it is in China, right, so they sort of map that across, the banks stand to lose actually $43 billion, because if you think about a transaction, right, so if it's a $100 product, 97 is what the merchant gets, $3 is fees, right, whether that's your Stripe or whether that's whatever transfer that's enabling that. How do you think about that with the unique way that you're thinking about cash on delivery here?
Yeah. So let's take a step back. Okay. Banking as a service, I'm a firm believer in. Why? If you look at what has evolved in Europe now, the bank that we also use, because our holding company is in the Netherlands, the underlying IBAN or international bank account number for this fintech bank that we use is Citibank. So do I believe that the largest banks or the most powerful commercial banks today, should they have banking as a service? Absolutely. Because they've got the licensing, they've got the regulatory approvals, let it be their IBANs. What fintechs need to do in this space is provide the leads for the deposit holder, the leads for basically the account management around it. So I think there's value amongst fintechs there, right? Now, when you compare Visa, MasterCard versus Alipay, for example, what's the fundamental difference? The fundamental differences in Visa, MasterCard, their fees are probably comparable to Alipay's fees, 0.2, 0.3%, somewhere around that range. It's the banks in the middle that basically charge you, let's say 2-3%. But the premise behind that charge was actually credit. It was supposed to be credit cards that you were supposed to charge 2.5 or 3% for. And it's criminal that they're charging that on debit cards, you know? So I think if they change that, it's one small change, right? Don't charge those astronomical fees on debit cards. Credit, absolutely. You know, you should, because basically it's not money someone has. So, you know, I think a lot of, you know, there's a lot of storytelling going around the world, right? And I think it'll normalize in a few years.
Yeah. So, and you know, this concept on cash on delivery, I find it interesting. I mean, you know, this concept, it may not be as common in the United States and more developing countries, but a lot of it also stems from how do we first build trust, right? That's how it started. And I want to talk about trust here and your business because, and Nadeem from Gojek spoke about this as well, you know, that he started the business when he realized he could actually trust an outsider who may not come across as someone, you know, in working in the offices and all that, but who's actually an OJEC that wants to earn a little bit more. And in a country like Pakistan, where there's undoubtedly for outsiders tuning in, a lot of hesitation in terms of just, you know, we talked about this, right? Hesitation in investing in the market. How do you think about building trust? And how do you think about, you know, handing someone in Pakistan cash for a product and how you building that trust as you roll out your different products here?
See, ultimately, it's about your faith, assurance that this is being tracked. Right? If you have the assurance that anyone that you're engaging with, there's recourse if they fail on the transaction, you know, then you will trust, right? Now, the cool thing about ride hailing is everything's tracked. You'd be surprised, you know, that in a city like Karachi where petty crime, you know, like robbing people of their smartphone on a motorbike was so common, right? A few years ago.
Yeah.
Still happens off and on, right? Just to steal a smartphone, just rob someone, right? It hardly happens on Bykea. And you'd be like, why? Because the robber knows that the exact location would be tracked. Now, if you hop on the bike, the mobile number, the telecom basic tracking of that passenger would also be tracked. So tracking solves a lot of it, you know. In terms of cash management, I'll take a step back again, you know. Let's look at the examples of Russia or India or Saudi Arabia. Let's look at Saudi Arabia. Saudis are they're the largest e-commerce buyers in the Middle East. When they buy from overseas, they'll charge their card. When they don't have an option to pay by cash on delivery, they'll charge their card. But whenever they have an option to pay by cash on delivery, they'll always choose cash on delivery locally. Why? Because they'll pay after they get the item. So I don't think cash on delivery has as much to do about trust as it does on the preference to pay after you get it. Now,
well, it's the lack of trust is what I'm getting at, right? The reason why cash on delivery started in countries like ours, I'm talking Malaysia here, more emerging markets, was because compared to in the United States, like Amazon, right? I have no hesitation making all these purchases, even if it's high value, because I know the return policy is so good. No matter what, I have that trust there. Whereas in Asia emerging markets, there's a lack of trust. But eventually, what I'm getting at is eventually, don't you think, Muneeb, that it will move over, just as how, you know, the aunties, the uncles in Asia are now trusting, getting into someone, you know, the premise of your business is trust in technology. So don't you feel like Bykea Cash over time will somehow cannibalize as you continue to build the trust sort of reputation, right? Doesn't it, you know?
That's the plan, right? I mean, the plan is exactly that. The plan is to acquire users via cash and have those users use other services as well, get them to be sticky, offer them a digital solution as well, and stick to your platform. Ultimately, it's about user acquisition, right? And retention. Like if I just exclude all options that a customer wants today, one, I wouldn't even acquire this user, and two, I wouldn't even retain this user. And we're paranoid about cohorts, right? So yeah, it's a step towards a sticky user long term.
Got it. Got it. And I appreciate the fact that you don't want to be a wallet. I know there's very strong views on whether this should be the way forward or not. And you talk about retention as being one of the key things in your business. Unfortunately, you're right, COVID-19 hit. You've had to furlough quite a few folks. How are you thinking about retention from both supply and demand side as you emerge from this crisis that we're all, sort of working through?
Yeah. So on the supply side, listen, I mean, these people are on your network because they're trying to make, it's a gig economy. They're trying to make extra money. And if they're working permanently on your platform, that means basically they can't get a job anywhere else. And as far as Bykea is concerned, we don't necessarily like or love that set of a driver. We'd rather have a driver who already has a job somewhere else and plugs in 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening on our platform. Why? Because the supplemental income allows us to one, give this person more money. And the way we think of this is how much will this person make in an hour, not in a month. Because ultimately, this whole supply side is based upon earnings per hour. Now you can increase the earnings per hour by giving a bonus, but your goal should be to give enough jobs in an hour, right? For the 2 hours that someone's on or 1 hour that someone's on, if you can give multiple jobs, right, you don't need to pay a bonus, right? You basically allow the person to earn their way into more income. And so how do you do that? You do that through this super app strategy.
Right.
People who come to your platform, to your app, come from multiple demographics. They may come from a demographic that can only afford to hop on the back of a motorbike to get from A to B.
Yeah.
But they can also come from a demographic which is slightly more affluent, which is a demographic that can afford food delivery. The reason I say afford food delivery is because in these emerging geographies, you've got to pay at least $1 or maybe less than $1 for delivery fees. So if the average order value is very low, the propensity for people to pay that delivery fee is going to be very little. So unless people are ordering in bunches, groups of two to three, the average order value doesn't rise. So now you've got a middle class in there. And then when you throw in payments as well, now you've got the whole gambit of it, right? So all these leads fall to the same supply, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's yes, it's a two-sided marketplace. When I think of a super app side, a unified basically network, it's actually on our supply side, not necessarily on the demand side.
Right. And how has this pandemic made you rethink the way you're approaching your business? And of course, taking into account as well the recent news that despite a pandemic, right, GoTo is going ahead, and there's the word in Indonesian, Raksasa. This is the newest behemoth monster that's coming into the market here, the largest technology group that started as, Nadeem and a couple of guys, coming up with something to innovate.
Just like the SARS was a pivotal change in digital adoption in China. Unfortunately, but fortunately for us, COVID has been that lever to drive user behavior towards digitization. So it's been great. During a complete lockdown, motorbike taxi was banned for a short period of time.
Yeah.
But ever since it's turned on, that business has more than doubled. And then your commerce business is also growing, right? And so the reason why they're going public is because these businesses are booming, and so it's also a great time to raise money. So I think, all the power to them.
Right. And is that in the horizon for you in the near term to
going public?
To grow in the similar way of a full super app and potentially, raise even more? Yeah.
Absolutely. Who are we inspired by? We're inspired by Gojek, we're inspired by Grab, Meituan. No one talks about Meituan. Meituan is the holy grail of it, right? So we're constantly studying Meituan. We love the kind of, micro level advertising that they do, the reviews and the community, building that they do. And so I think they drive. One thing that Meituan does very well, by the way, which we all need to learn from, is frequency and repeat usage and user-generated content. Grab doesn't have user-generated content. Gojek doesn't. Tokopedia has to a certain extent.
Yeah. We're
trying to figure out how do we generate Meituan-style user-generated content to get that user to keep coming back. So yeah, we have plans.
We have plans. I love that. Always love hearing that. And what do you think will be your challenges here as we wrap up and go into the next segment?
Yeah, the challenge is basically, around our product. For example, when we're doing food, we're launching a food category as well in Bykea, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you differentiate the product to not go head on with someone with a lot of money to burn?
Yeah.
So for example, in our market, there's Food Panda. But what does Food Panda have? They got money to burn in discounts. That's one. Two, they've got this network which operates in like a closed radius. And so, where, of course, you experiment and you tweak and then you get a product out and then you make certain changes. What we don't want to do is we don't want to drive adoption through selling below cost, which is what most companies do, right?
Yeah.
We want and we hope that the product that we create, the journeys that we create, are a discovery journey. So, for example, we're going to focus on street food, on discovering street food, on being able to call the restaurant directly, leave a voice note directly. We want that communication to happen, right? We want the restaurants to be our friends. Don't think of us as enemies. So how do we do that? It's complex, but we're going to keep listening to them and we're going to keep building products that they love.
Love it. Great. And that brings me to a nice segue to the billion-dollar questions. So 8 questions, Muneeb. Say whatever comes to mind succinctly and respond to the 8 questions here. So are you ready?
Sure.
Number 1, when you think of the word successful, who do you think of and why?
Ray Dalio.
Why?
Ray Dalio was, so the largest hedge fund in the world was Bridgewater. And Ray Dalio led it. He built it from scratch. And what he leaves behind today is not just a fantastic book called The Principles. You should absolutely read it. But he's a mentor. I follow him on Twitter. I listen to everything he says. I hope that if I'm that rich, I don't know if I can be, I am as humble and as good a mentor as he is.
Great choice. Common misconceptions about you?
That I have money and that I live in my daddy's house.
You're not living in your daddy's house now, are you? Highest high?
Highest high? getting my LASIK surgery done. I was -7 both eyes.
Wow. When did you do that?
Long time ago.
Good. Lowest low.
Almost running out of money. And being, we almost died. We almost died. Had it not been for someone to really come in and bail us, we almost died once. And that was heartbreaking because we knew that the only thing we didn't have was money. Because we had a great product, we had a great team, we had everything going for us. But investors many a times get blown away by the paranoia of these gorillas, not recognizing that every one of them has an Achilles heel.
Yeah, love that. And you know, I noticed you use the word paranoia a lot. I think that is definitely one of the things that stands you out as a founder, because you're obsessing over what next, right? And I've heard this from a couple of your investors as well. Muneeb is the one guy that I've heard say paranoia a lot, and you've used that in this conversation a lot. Best advice you've been given?
Best advice? A friend of mine, basically, when I was at one of the lowest ebbs in my career, you know, he said, you know, even if you're drowning, Muneeb, give it one last shot. And I say that to myself almost every week now. You know, even if you're drowning, give it one last shot.
Persistence. Favorite tool, hack for productivity?
DingTalk and Calendly. So for those of you who don't know, DingTalk is owned by the Alibaba Group. It's a clone of Slack, but the cool thing about it has voice notes and has had voice notes way before Slack did. So, and it's free. So
great. Your biggest fear?
Living a meaningless life, a life without a purpose.
What does that mean?
How can you wake up in the morning and not have something to fret about? How can you go to sleep at night and not dream about work? I think it'd be a meaningless life if I don't have something to stress about.
Okay. And finally, you've got a couple of kids that are looking to you as a role model in their lives. What are the qualities, 3 qualities that you would want them to have as they move forward in their life into adulthood?
Yeah, so I mean, you're never always going to be the smartest person, right, in a room. So I think persistence will train you to be the best skilled person in that room. So keep at it. Grit is the first thing I would say. The second thing is, and you know, I'll bite on my tongue many a times on this, but don't immediately respond to things. Like, don't immediately respond to emails. Don't snap back, especially if you're irritated. Like, always let it settle. Respond back in 12 hours or something. You know.
Yeah.
In this world of chats and social media, many times we'll immediately respond back, and it's not necessarily good. The third is, your life is public. Whether you like it or not, Google, Facebook, everyone knows where you live, every meter that you move, right? Everything that you say, everything that you write is public. Recognize that and curate your, you know, your diary. This is your digital diary.
And that's interesting. And I want to throw this last one in as we wrap up here. You know, I've heard you speak about the digital side of things and the afterlife that we actually have, which is your third point. You know, the fact that we are now being watched in some way. In the afterlife of Muneeb Maayr, when you look back, what would be the legacy that you want to leave behind?
Yeah, in some way or the other, if you're remembered for contributing something good and helping a large set of people live a better life. either economically or in any other form. If whether you're a scientist, an inventor, a tech entrepreneur, a social worker, if you have enabled not a handful of people, if you've enabled many people, ideally thousands of people, if you've enabled them, you can rest in peace, because we're all going to go. Listen, no one knows if there is an afterlife or not. You should just go in peace.
Love that. And what a great way to end. I mean, Muneeb, thank you so much for taking this time really to chat through everything from the challenges of going into a super app, the strategies of emerging markets, and really some of the challenges there, and your deepest fear of leaving a meaningless life. There's been so much that you've shared with us here today. I'm so thankful for your time, and I'm excited, Muneeb, for the thousands and millions of lives that you will impact and the legacy that you will leave. Muneeb, thanks so much for joining us today.
Appreciate it. Great chatting with you as always. Take care.
Yeah, great. All right. Thanks, Muneeb.